right? You might collect $100 in their insurance premium, but guess what? They're not going to collect. Now, a great example is myself. The last 10 years I've been lucky enough. I've paid about $12,000 a year, about a little over $100,000 to insurance. Okay, and I haven't taken one dime out. Now that's good for me because I've been relatively healthy, but that also means I'm out over $100,000 that the insurance money got from me, and they were just lucky enough that I didn't really need it, and therefore they made money on me. At the same time, there was someone who maybe just bought insurance and then got cancer the next day, and that cost the insurance company a lot of money. That's good for that person. They have coverage for their medical costs, but it's bad for the insurance company because they're losing money. So if you made insurance relatively cheap, like let's say this is this circle in the upper right hand corner, right, you have everyone wanting it, because even the most healthy people would say, sure, better to be safe than sorry. But you would probably have no insurers because, like, right, at that money will never break even. Now, if you were to lower the price of raise the price of insurance, or to get rid of some of these high-risk people, like throw grandma from the train, exclude people with pre-existing conditions, don't insure couch potatoes, eventually what you would see is the number of people who would want to buy this, or the number of people being offered, would be relatively low. But what you'd also find is that all the insurance companies would want to show up, and they would compete with each other for those small group of healthy individuals who they're sure to make a profit on. And so what happens here is in health insurance is that the ideal situation is that everyone who needs insurance everyone buys insurance, and everyone can get insurance. This is why most countries in the world have insurance mandates. In Japan and Germany, there's a law. You have to buy insurance. No questions asked. You have to buy it. That's the law. If you don't, we'll put a penalty on you. At the same time, no one is excluded. There's no such thing as pre-existing conditions. But what we have in the United States is a market, and you could get a situation where everyone, full participation by insurees, full participation by insurers. But you could also get a situation where you have all insurers and no insurees, or all insurees and no insurers, which means the market doesn't work. Right? Because if you have sellers of health insurance but no buyers, that's not really a good situation to be in. It is sort of kind of what we have now, where we only provide insurance for about 80% of the total. Or you get a situation where everyone wants to buy it, right? Because everyone might get sick, but no one's wanting to sell it, in which case no one can get health insurance, and we go back to those old days where we pay doctors with chickens and cows, right, on a pay per service type of basis. Now, if you look over here, this is one reason why we have so many problems with health insurance in the United States. Most countries in the world, most of the developed world, you have 100% of people covered by insurance, because they have these rules saying the government will provide it for you, or you have to buy insurance, no questions asked. And if you're really poor, maybe the government will give you a helping hand, but everyone has to have insurance, and guess what? No one's excluded. And then you have this thick red line here, which is the United States. In the United States, only about 80% of the total population gets insurance, which means 20% of the public basically is out of luck. And that's because, there might be some people who decide they're healthy enough that they don't need to buy insurance, or there might be some people who can't get insurance because they have pre-existing conditions, and therefore no one's willing to sell it for them. Now, only a few countries actually do worse in terms of coverage in the United States. We have Turkey, we have Mexico, and we have Chile. Yay! Now, considering that we spend a lot of money on this is not a good thing. Now, maybe you say, I don't care about health insurance, I have health insurance, it's not a problem for me. But the cost of health insurance, even if you can still get it, is a problem. And this you can see this in the graphs of productivity and real wages. Productivity is how much different people are producing. Wages is what they're getting paid for their production. Now, theoretically, these numbers should be the same, because someone should, on average, pay you what you're worth. Right? Some people might be getting paid more, but other people are getting paid less, and in total, it should equal out. And you can kind of see this, where all three lines are basically going up together from the 1950s to about 1980. As people became more productive, they were paid more. And what you see from about 1980 on, you see kind of a wedge, where productivity continues to go up, but people's wages are not, at least not measured by the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Now, why is this gap opening up? The main reason is health insurance. Now, for example, people's wages might be constant. I'm not losing money. No one's getting pay cuts. Not that many people are getting fired, at least not until recently. But what's going up is their compensation, because their bosses have to pay more and more money to provide health insurance for people who have those types of benefits. But because health insurance is going up, I can't give you more take-home pay. And as a result, people's, let's say, pay stubs are actually smaller than it should be relative to how productive they are. People should be making more money, but they're not, because that money is being siphoned off and then funneled into a relatively inefficient healthcare system. Now, one last reason of this is that if you look here, the United States spends a lot more. And you can think of this in terms of cents on the dollar. So this is what percent of our GDP do we spend on healthcare. So for every dollar we produce, how much of that dollar do we spend on healthcare? And here you can see the United States. Here's that purple line, or fuchsia line on the top, and the United States spends about 16-17 cents of every dollar in healthcare. A lot more than the rest of the world. A lot more. And a lot more, and growing. And remember those countries that were behind us, Turkey, Chile, Mexico? You can see them. These are these purple lines on the bottom. It's no wonder that, let's say, they're not covering as many people. They're not spending as much. But remember, the United States is spending 17 cents on every dollar to provide health care, and we're only covering 80% of the population, which means if we covered at our current rates as much as, let's say, Germany, France, other European countries, Japan, etc., we would actually be spending about 20% of every dollar. The problem isn't how much we're spending per se. All these other countries would have the same coverage, but the United States is so inefficient, and partially because what we do is we have this type of market, where we leave it up to the market to decide who can buy insurance and who can get insurance. And that has, let's say, consequences. So let's just take a last look at the disco model. Now remember, the rocking horse model was like kind of like a bowl. It was turned upwards. But like the disco model is a mountain with, let's say, you have this high peak here with the price on top. And what can happen is that even a small shock comes in, it's going to shift that price off the top and down into the depression at the bottom. And it's going to get trapped there. And this can happen from the other side as well, where the shock comes in, knocks the price off, the price lands in this equilibrium. And these low-level equilibriums are where there's buyers and no sellers, or sellers and no buyers. The stable equilibrium, right, you can see it cups. There's no reason for it to move once it's there, but it's suboptimal because we'd much rather, let's say, the prices be on top of this mountain. That would be, let's say, where everyone is better off. But this point is that that equilibrium is very unstable. You can maybe balance that pinball on the top, okay, and if you don't touch it, it will stay there. But there's lots of, let's say, vibrations in the economy that can really easily knock it off, and once it does, you can get trapped in these low level equilibriums. So a few more things about the disco model. Basically, it's this idea that what the economy is doing is matching people up. It's matching workers and employers. It's matching insurers and insurees. It's matching up entrepreneurs with venture capital. It's matching up schools and students. And you can think of this in terms of, think of all of you who are applying to college right now. Imagine you could just step onto the auctioneer scale, okay, and let's say you could determine whether your value was enough to get into this or that college, right? You would step on the scale and it would measure your value and all the things that were important to the college, and then it would just go ding, 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 accepted, or wah, wah, okay, turned down. It wouldn't cost you any energy to go through the to match you up with the right college, right? We could just measure you and measure the college, okay, and then we can make the decisions based on that. But instead, okay, you have to go on college trips, you got to go through applications, you have to put a lot of effort. You have to take the SAT, you have to get all your grades in line, send your transcripts, get letters of recommendation, all the other things you're probably like pulling your hair out right now. And it's because that what the economy is doing is trying to match people up, and that can be very costly. Okay? And when you think of it like that, it's not going to be this auctioneer that's going to determine your true value. It's not your true underlying value, it's sometimes how much effort you put into, let's say, this matching process. Now, one of its insights is that there's markets and there's non-markets. Markets can't just be assumed to be there. They have to be created, and someone has to create them. The auctioneer is not working for free. And so we have to, let's say, invest or do research or go from store to store to find the bargains. They're not just going to magically appear in front of us just because we want them to be. We don't have perfect information. The second big insight is this idea of multiple equilibria. Okay, there's many different places where supply and demand could cross. There's many different possible prices, and whether you end up there is how stable those different equilibria are. And what might be disturbing is there's stable suboptimal equilibria, which means things we don't want are very stable, we're going to get them. And also the places where we want to be are very unstable, which means what we want we can't have, or it's going to be very difficult to maintain the optimal equilibria. It's not going to be natural. It's not just going to happen. And as a result of this equilibrium, not being, let's say, on top, not getting the best of all possible worlds, is actually a relatively natural state of affairs. And a lot of this has to do with that economic agents don't have perfect information, that their transactions, information is costly, and as a result, they don't always make the right decision. Now, the last model, the fourth model is the corridor model. And this was put forth by Axel Leonhofen. He basically says, look, in a certain range, the economy works like the rocking horse. Okay, and that's where we are most of the time. This is like driving on the paved part of the road, right? And the prices basically fluctuate in this narrow range, or this corridor. Now, the problem is, though, there's also very steep sides. You can see there's little bumps to keep the price inside the corridor. But if it was to fall over those guardrails or go past those barriers, okay, you can see it looks just like the disco model, right? You fall off and you fall into these low-level equilibriums. So let's say, for example, this corridor. You have the corridor in the middle that works like the rocking horse. As long as you're there, things work more or less fine. But if you're on the right side of the corridor, you could have accelerating inflation or accelerating deflation. Now, we generally know what the ranges are where the economy basically works normal. Think of this, as I said, you're driving on the paved road, and as long as you stay on the paved road, the car drives fine. But if you go off the paved road, you better have a four-wheel drive vehicle, because things are not going to be able to manage it if you don't. And generally, the economy is not a four-wheel drive vehicle. And these are basically, the ranges are 2 to 10% inflation. Anywhere in that range, not necessarily ideal, but basically the economy, the basic laws of supply and demand, as we mostly experience them, are going to be in force. And between 10 and 5% unemployment. Now, another way of saying this is that once you get over 10-20% inflation, once you get over 20% inflation, it's not very hard to go to 10,000, 2 million, 10,000, 20,000% inflation, which means that once you get there, it'll accelerate very quickly. The same thing with unemployment. Once unemployment gets over, let's say,